Hi, so today we're going to be talking about rotoscoping. And essentially, rotoscoping, what it is taking a video clip, and we're going to be working with this 2-second video clip of Kai rollerblading. And essentially, what rotoscoping means is that you take a video clip and you trace over the clip frame by frame. And really, to make things more efficient, it would be more like tracing over every other frame or every third frame, right? Um, Otherwise, that's a lot of frames that you would be tracing over. So we're going to be using Animate for this. And like Illustrator, Animate is a vector-based program. But before we get into Animate and how to import the video, I want to talk a little bit about the video itself. So, when you prepare your video for rotoscoping, I have a few recommendations. And one is that you choose something very dynamic, right? So, um, and that's not so much of an aesthetic thing, so much as it allows you to really play with perspective and maybe tracing over things that would be hard to kind of draw in person, right? So if somebody's hand is reaching toward the camera or somebody's spinning around, these are things that are much harder to freehand draw. That with rotoscoping, you have the ability to um, kind of again trace because you're tracing over the video, you have that guide. So one is, yeah, to choose something dynamic, dynamic movement for your actor. And you can also involve a little camera movement as well, though I don't think this is as necessary, since you can kind of simulate camera movement in post-production if you want to go that route. Um, the other thing I highly recommend is shooting outdoors on a bright day. And this isn't so much for the composition of the video itself, because once we trace over the video, we're going to be um, tossing the video out once when we export for the final product. The reason why I think it's a good idea to shoot in a bright sunny day is because you get lots of light comes into the camera. And for something like this, you can use a smartphone. You don't need to use kind of a fancy camera. But what happens is the shutter speed, uh, if things are on auto, if you have an auto camera setting, which, on your smartphone you will, it will automatically generate a faster shutter speed. Or if you're using a DSLR or other camera, you can boost the shutter speed that way. And what that does is it makes the frames really crisp, right? So that you don't get a lot of motion blur. So if you were to shoot inside, dark, dim lighting, that kind of thing, the shutter speed would have to slow down to compensate for the lack of light. And as a result, you would get some motion blur where the shutter was open a little bit longer. So you want a really short, like really quick shutter speed, right? And if you do have the luxury of shooting on like a DSLR or something that you can control the shutter speed, I would say aim for something like 1/25th of a second or higher. The higher, the crisper your frames are going to be. Um, and the third recommendation is to, you don't need a super high resolution, but if you had full HD 1920 by 1080, that would probably be sufficient. And again, this is just so that it serves as a good guide for you to be able to trace over the frame and see all the detail. Beyond that, the composition itself doesn't matter too much. So if I were to rotoscope this video, I could, if I wanted to, yes, I could include the pathway and the trees and the bushes and all that kind of stuff. But I could I could choose to only have Kai rollerblading, and he could be rollerblading on clouds. He could be rollerblading underwater. He could be wherever um, I wanted him to be for this rotoscope. So that is the video itself. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here so that I can skip over to Adobe Animate. And I'll share that screen. Um, so Animate is a really, I think for what we're doing here, Animate is a really easy program to use. Um, it's actually a more complicated program when you dive deeply into it, in the sense that Animate can produce interactive animations that involve some coding and stuff like that. But for the purposes of this exercise and for the purposes of rotoscoping, it's a pretty straightforward thing to grasp. Probably the most kind of nebulous thing is importing the QuickTime movie itself. So that's why one of the main reasons why I wanted to create this tutorial is just to provide a guide for that. So to import that QuickTime movie that we saw, I'm going to go ahead and um, first of all, I'll create a new project. So file new. I'm not going to worry too much about the settings right now. I do know that my video is 4K, so I'll go ahead and um, create that. Those things can always be changed later. All right. So you have a similar, you'll notice it's somewhat similar interface to what you have with Illustrator and even Photoshop to some extent, and to maybe a lesser extent, After Effects, right? So you have your toolbar here, right? Similar to Illustrator and Photoshop, and then you can hover over these um, tools with the little disclosure triangles at the bottom, and they reveal more tools and that kind of thing, right? And then you have your sort of composition space, which in uh, Animate they call the stage. Now I'll try not to call this program that we're working in Flash, but if you've ever heard of Flash, which used to be a really popular program in the early 2000s, one for creating interactive media, but mainly for creating just funny stuff that you might see on Adult Swim or that kind of thing. So there's the stage. Over to the right, you have your properties window, and just like an Illustrator, whatever you have selected on screen, or if you don't have anything selected, it will tell you the properties of your stage. But all those parameters will show up there. And then finally at the bottom, we have the timeline. Now, this timeline is a little different than timelines that we've seen before in that it actually indicates kind of frame by frame, right? So right now I'm highlighting, each frame, and as you can see, it's like it kind of uh, bookends things off between 5, 10, 15, 20 frames, and so on. All right, so let's go ahead and import the movie itself. File, import, import video. I want to embed H.264 timeline. And now I have to find that rollerblading video. So there it is. And I just kind of follow the prompts here, click next. Yes, I do want to place an instance on the stage. I want to expand the timeline, and I don't really need to include audio. And but I might as well click this match document frames per second. And then I click next, and I click finish. All right, so there is my video. You can see it's pretty blown up, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink that down so we can see that. Oh, maybe even a little bit more, so we can see that more. Yeah, I think we got the whole thing in here. And you'll notice that the video occupies layer one, and I'm just going to call this video, and I'll lock it so we don't accidentally mess around with it, move it, that kind of thing. One thing that I do want us to notice is that there is a little black dot here. That's an indication of a keyframe. And what this timeline is telling me, I don't know if y'all can remember, but we could see those little divided keyframes before, and now it's just like a long bar, right? And that indicates that there is something on that layer. I'm actually going to add another layer to that so that we can see this a little bit maybe more clearly. And so, yeah, so instead of there being that black keyframe on layer two, which I'll go ahead and call that roto, there is a kind of a black circle, kind of a hollow black circle. And that indicates that there is an empty keyframe. So there is nothing on that layer whatsoever. So to start drawing, I'm going to go ahead and use my pencil tool. My pencil tool is not up here, but if I go down to the three dots, I can indicate that I want my pencil tool. I'm just going to drag it. I can kind of click and drag it wherever I want, and there it is, right below my brush tool. And the pencil tool uh, refers to the stroke color here. So the fill color, I'll go ahead and set that as well. So I'm just going to make that kind of vibrant red, and the stroke color, I'll make kind of a light yellow. So whatever I draw with the pencil tool is this yellowish stroke color. And then when I fill, the tracing that I did, then that will be done with the paint bucket, and that will um, reference the fill. Now, I've got to warn you, I am on a laptop with a trackpad, so my tracing won't be awesome. And really, okay, so I'm looking at this. I don't know if you can see what's going on here, but the stroke is a little thinner than I would want. So I'm going to thicken that up. The other weird thing that's happening is it's turning this into like angles, right? And the reason why it does this, if we look down here at the lower left of the toolbar, where it's got this little option for the pencil mode, and right now it's set to straighten by default. I'm going to go ahead and set that to smooth. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, and that'll kind of get rid of that overly angular approach. And then over here in my properties window, you'll remember that I mentioned that whatever tool or object or anything that is selected um, your properties window will reflect that. So let's try a stroke size of 11. Before it was 1. Yeah, and so you can see that's quite a bit thicker, right? All right, so all I'm doing right now is I'm tracing around, and it is okay if I let up on the pencil. I'm just gonna, it will take a couple of go arounds, lifting up and down and that kind of thing. And I'm pretty zoomed in. I don't really have to be quite so zoomed in. So I'm just going to continue tracing around the entire body. All right, so I have traced, you can see here, I've traced around the entire body. And you can see if you look really closely that I'll zoom in a little bit here. Again, that's Command plus shortcut key. There's kind of like this dotted texture. All that means is that that layer, whatever it is that's dotted, that is currently selected, right? So I can select if I want to, in this case, the next thing I'm going to do is to fill this outline with red paint bucket. And so I want to make sure I'm on the right layer to do that. And I'll go ahead and fill this first frame. Now, when you're working on your rotoscope, you don't have to do things in this order. You can do all your tracings and then go back and do all your paint fills and that kind of thing. But just to demonstrate a couple of frames, I'm going to go ahead and do my paint fill now. So I have that outline selected and boom, click with my paint bucket, but nothing happens, right? So down here below your fill and stroke colors, you have this white box. And if I click on that, there's some options here. Don't close gaps, which is the default that it's set to, then close small gaps, and then finally at the bottom, close large gaps. I'm going to go ahead and just click on close large gaps. And I guess what that means is that if there's any little breaks in your brush, then and you try to do the paint fill, it will not paint fill. So let's try this again. All right. So boom. All right. So we have our first frame. Cool. Awesome. All right. And then what I'm going to do, since as I mentioned before, I don't need to animate every single frame, right? So I can either animate on twos, so every other frame, or I can animate on threes, every third frame, right? So I'll go ahead and skip this frame and then just move one frame over. Since this is a pretty dynamic shot, I think animating on threes might be a little too, I might miss some information. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to, I have the first frame drawn, but I want to have a new drawing or a new tracing for the second frame or for the third frame, which is the animating on threes, right? So it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, so on, right? All odd numbers. So I want a completely new tracing for this. So what I'm going to do is with that third frame on the roto layer selected, I'm going to control click and insert blank keyframe. And what that does is that kind of siphons the tracing for the first frame off into its own category. And really, if I play this back, I can see that it's frame 1 and 2. And then frame 3 is kind of a reset, right, where I have a new drawing. So I'm going to do the same thing. So you can see at this point, you kind of got most of the stuff. The only thing that we'll have to do later is export. But rotoscoping is a very repetitive process, right? So once you have that first, once you kind of get the gist of it, the rest is repetition, repetition, right? And the pro of that, of course, is that you can, as I mentioned before, you can put on podcasts and music, kind of turn your mind off to some extent. And this is just kind of like a meditative activity. Um, and the con, of course, is that if you want animation that is super fast, this is not super fast. It takes a while. So it's got some pros and cons in here. So, all right. So now we have the second frame, right? And you can kind of see there's some movement happening. I can also, if I want, I can turn off the video layer, which means I have to unlock it first. And I'm just going to click off so we're not seeing like the dotted texture everywhere, right? So you can already see some stuff is starting to come together there. Just for the sake of demonstration, I will do one more frame. And once again, I go every other frame, right? So that puts me now at frame 5. And just as we did before, resting on frame 5 here of the roto layer, I'm going to control click and insert blank keyframe. So there we are again. All right. So I feel like we're in a decent place now. Um, I'm going to just go ahead and, for now, just cap this off by inserting a blank keyframe. And I'm going to turn off my video for a second so we can kind of focus on that. And I'll zoom out a little bit too, just so we can see the full body shot. Right, so now I play it back and it looks like it's kind of selecting some stuff. So I keep trying to unselect that, but it won't show up in the final output. But even though I'm using my trackpad, right, and I warned y'all in the beginning that the trackpad would be a little like my motion would be, or my drawings, my tracings would be a little crusty, but in some senses it adds like a nice stylized approach as well, right? And you can see where that, that one arm is kind of coming back and the other arm is coming forward, right? So we are capturing that sense of movement. Um, Now, the other thing I wanted to kind of point out about rotoscoping is I'm doing like a really sort of simple, basic rotoscope, outline, fill, that kind of thing. But one of the really cool things about rotoscope is you can take advantage of that movement, um, the movement that you have from the video, and you can kind of embellish, right? So I could have put like a dog's head or a tail or something like that on Kai here and, just had like some fun. And as I mentioned before, like the background can be whatever you want it. So he can be like rollerblading on clouds or that kind of thing. But I always do have that video guide. All right. So once you're done with that, what I'm going to do, you might not need to do this, but I'll go ahead and show you anyway. Well, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trash that video layer. I don't need that anymore. But uh, if you have a video that's longer than the amount that the exercise specifies, you can actually go ahead and select. Now, y'all's video is going to be a bit longer than mine is here, but I just want to show you kind of a really brief version of it. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting all these frames that I'm not using. They're just empty frames, right? And I'm going to um, remove frames. And now I can, that allows me to do things like I can kind of test the movie. Um, I can export it and it won't export all those uh, empty frames. So you don't have to do this part, but I can do kind of a quick and dirty, like see how my movie's coming along and repeat if I go to the control drop-down menu and test scene. And you see there's not tons there, but I can start to see some motion coming together. All right. And what this did, you won't actually be able to use this for I gotta see how to get out of here. There we go. You won't be able to use this file for your what you upload because it's a .swf file. So I don't think like YouTube used to recognize those files, and they used to be a lot more recognizable. Now they're almost extinct, I believe. So, but it is a good it is a good way to test the movie and see how the animation is going and that kind of thing. So I actually do want to go ahead and export now. Um, so, in a format that we are able to use. And I want to show you a couple of different exporting techniques, right? So, if I wanted, if I filled in the background here in Animate and I had everything I needed, then I could export as like an H.264, right? But if I want to export just this body movement, and then I want to add in After Effects, let's say I want to composite this body silhouette with a different background in After Effects and add some other things and maybe even some 3D cameras or whatever, basically I want to take this into After Effects, but I want to make sure that this silhouette is on an alpha channel, right? So I want to make sure that there's transparency. Well, then I would export it. I would need to make sure that I export it with an alpha channel. So those are the two options that I'm kind of like presenting. One is you drew everything, you filled everything in. It's a self-contained composition. You don't need to add anything else. Export as an H.264, simple, that kind of thing. But if you want to take it in After Effects for compositing and you want that alpha channel there, you want that transparency, then you need to export it as an Apple ProRes 4444 with the alpha channel. All right, so I'm going to go File, Export, And I'm going to go export video / media. And if I am exporting this as an alpha channel, I'm going to ignore stage color, and that will generate an alpha channel. And I would set this to QuickTime, right? So this is right now, this is just the After Effects if you wanted to take it into After Effects and do some stuff with it there. And you'll notice, by the way, that the render size is 3840 by 2160. That's because my video itself was 4K. And I am going to choose Apple ProRes 4444 with alpha. And then I can kind of determine where I want that to go. Which I might want to just have that go to my desktop. But yeah, if I'm just exporting this plane, you'll do it as the H.264. I'm assuming that you'll have the stage color filled in and all that kind of stuff. So in that case, you don't need to generate the alpha channel. You just export as an H.264. All right. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see y'all in class.